All right. All right. This is our last panel before we embarrass Stelios Papadopoulos and shower him with love and praise. So this panel is, again, a panel that we've had consistently at the Bio Summit for several years now. It's a panel on data, digital science, and healthcare. And I will quickly jump into the panel. Sastry, if you can come up here, I'll quickly introduce you, and then you can invite your panelists up and introduce them. So Sastry is the chairman and CEO of the Emmes group, which consists of the CRO Emmes, which we heard from earlier with Peter Ranco, and Veridix AI, a technology analytics provider. Sastry is just an amazing individual and a leader in this field. He was CEO of Metadata. He spent 12 years doing his internship and residency at McKinsey as a partner, and he probably has advised many of you and pocketed a small fortune in that process. He's been involved in healthcare, software engineering, product development operations. He's been a board member of several different companies, and he's well-trained with an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern, an MS from the Ohio State University, and a technology bachelor's from the India Institute of Technology. So bring us home, Sastry.
Thank you, Andy. All right. We have an all-star panel here, and I'll get us started. We bring a wide range of perspectives. So we have Dina, who's an academic, who's a professor at MIT for 20 plus years. We have Belen and Nicole, who bring big pharma perspectives. We have Paul, who's bringing in the perspective of the patient and medical function. And then we have Parag, who's bringing in the financial investment perspective into AI. Now, unlike oncology, which the panel argued whether it changed in the last 20 years or 30 years or not, AI changes by the minute. So we have a lot of excitement going on. So what we wanted to do initially to kick it off is talk a little bit about what do we see as the biggest developments happening over the last couple of years in this field? Where do we see the biggest opportunities and advances, as well as where do we see the biggest challenges? And I'll start with maybe an anecdote about what we're doing. Over the last year, we built a bunch of agents to be able to do text-to-text and text-to-data transformations that drive a bunch of authoring and data management. And a couple of weeks ago, one of our customers, an ophthalmology customer, gave us a 2-page protocol synopsis and said, come back in 48 hours and show us what you guys can do. And we came in with a 150-page protocol, 15 study documents, a study build, and shells of a bunch of statistical documents that could all get auto-populated. And that happened in 48 hours. So that's the speed that AI can start to generate. But then you get into the back end, which is how quickly can you change the process? How quickly can you actually change the organizations and the SOPs to be able to adopt all of this? And that really is the opportunity about as we get into the AI space. As the technology advances and it's able to do a lot of really cool things, how do you actually advance the organizations and advance the way the work happens and the regulators come along on this journey to be able to make it work? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the group and ask for their anecdotes about what they're seeing. So maybe, Belen, we start with you.
Me too. Hi, everyone. Belen Fraile here. I'm leading the data science group here in J&J, and probably there's a lot of J&J, former J&J that know more about the company as well, given my recent tenure. So my experience in leveraging data science and the role that it has been playing in the space is that I think there is a few exercises that we need to do. First of all, quantitative sciences are critical to the role that research and development has been playing for many, many decades. And from the traditional methods, from the regression models, from the classification, clustering, that has been there all along. What has been different is in the latest 2-3 years is the full implementation at scale of these systems as we move into AI. And the challenge that we have as an industry when we discuss what is the impact of AI, what are the new things that they are coming, and how that is moving the needle in research and development, is the fact that we are talking about two different things. things, right? One thing is building progressively more insightful models from the multidimensionality of data that we have in R&D. And that's one area that we have been focusing on, and I would say there has been tremendous impact there. On the other side, from the automation and the intelligence that we can build out of the systems, and as we go into the agentic frameworks and everything that we are reading now out there, that gets into the ways of working and how all of the humans and the knowledge work is using those systems. From a lab technician to a clinical trial developers, there is very different lines of work and they need to use these new technologies. So in that adoption is where we have like some exercise to do here in industry, and I'm happy to discuss more.
Right, Dina?
Yeah. So just Sastry, just to make sure I understand you, are you talking about like the most interesting development in AI in general, or like something that is more targeted toward health and drug development discovery?
Yeah. Given your perspective, Dina, talk about the whole AI space overall and what has happened over the last couple of years that has completely changed. Treat the audience like a 101 class.
Wow. Actually, ChatGPT is old news, isn't it? As is. Okay, so more generally in AI, I guess the thing that everyone has been hearing about is the DeepSeek and the fact that computation is so expensive, but there is like the surprising result that you can achieve similar effectiveness of models with much less computation. And that's, in general, a very big problem for AI. Like, how do we reduce the computation power that is needed? That's one thing. I think you have to take it also with a lot of grain of salt here, because basically, you have to remember that DeepSeek has developed these models after there are equivalent models and very, very powerful models. So you can do a lot of trying to match those models with us through distillation or trying a variety of approaches that we know. Like, none of the things that they did is intrinsically innovative in any way, but because you have these prior models that were developed, and there is some belief that they used some feedback from these models, from the data. So, but this is one big problem. It's like, how do we reduce computation while still achieve like a humongous, the return that we are seeing on AI? The second thing is, of course, the reasoning. Like, we have seen the first generation of generative AI that can generate this amazing text, these amazing images and audio. But now, like, there is this reasoning, or what we talk about as a train of thoughts, like chain of thoughts. So that basically being able to go through how do you like solve a mathematical problem, not just by spitting out an answer, but reasoning about it the same way as a human reasons. And that has improved drastically, I think, since the last time we were here. I think another area that people are looking at, particularly now in the investment community, is what is like AI, both a genetic AI, like basically agents, and that is related to the reasoning, like being able to not just generate something, but reason about how to do something, get feedback, decide, make decisions, all of that stuff. And then another area is like, what is after text and images, which is something that actually very relevant here, which is like, what is a foundation model for other types of data, other modalities, like whether like you guys like were one of the first to look at AI for drug discovery, looking at proteins and understanding folding and all of that type of data. Another area that I'm particularly interested in, foundation model for clinical AI. Can we just like have AI that just look at very simple data that I know and that we can get just from analyzing the wireless signal in the environment that just like the Wi-Fi as bounces off your body, and from that we can get your breathing, your heartbeat, your sleep, your EEG even, without touching you. And not just that, analyzing what does that mean for disease progression as well as detection. So that's one type of clinical AI, and can we understand it the same way as LLM and standard foundation models?
Awesome. Nicole?
That is really exciting. I would say there's a few places that are really exciting or encouraging to me. And the first place that I would start is really around democratization. Democratization of data and knowledge. My entire career in biopharma, I've had scientists coming to me saying, hey, why do I always have to wait for a professional computational scientist to analyze data? Oh, have we ever looked at this target? Now I've got to search through 3,600 PowerPoint files from 25 years ago. We're finally starting to see true democratization where we're allowing scientists to interact with data and knowledge in ways that they haven't been able to do before. And why is that exciting? That could be a distraction, but it's exciting because they're showing us what's possible with some of this new technology. Sure, us in this room have decided, and we know that there's probably some big value plays, like in document generation and in predictive analytics around chemical structures, et cetera. But what I have found is that when you start to democratize these tools, our employees, our scientists will show us things that we never thought of. That much I guarantee you. And that's really the special sauce that I'm quite excited about.
Parag, keep going.
I was asked to start to give you a perspective on the numbers, the dollars being spent, and these are NVCA numbers, so all of you have access to these. But the order of magnitude, by the way, I heard that comment about 1 to 2 years. I can never think about anything in less than 5 years. Perhaps it's age. But over the last 5 years, you spend about 1.25 billion or raised in venture companies, right? So order of magnitude 250-ish a year, been as low as 163. 21 was an unusual year where about a little over 350 billion was raised for companies, right? The part that goes into the pieces of interest to this audience here, I think, are a little harder to break down. Some of that is clean, it's pharma biotech defined, and that typically gets 12-ish%. It varies a little bit, but if you look at a 5-year average, you'll get about 12%. And the other is the piece that's systems, right? And that might have software companies, and it might have AI companies. That's another 7% roughly, right? So you've got 12 and 7, 19% roughly, some of which is in this area, right? I think, and when we have time, I think I'll give you a sense of where I think more needs to be spent, but it is also dwarfed now by the amount going into software, right? So, and software used to be 40-ish% of the total part, but it's now closer to 50%. A lot of that has come out of this area. Now, some of that might actually, its end application might be the areas of interest to the pharma biotech industry, right? So there's a piece of that that's leaking. And then just to use one big example of that, in the first quarter this year, which was an aberration, over $90 billion was invested in venture, but $40 billion of that was the OpenAI deal, right? So it skews the numbers significantly. You do have skews, from time to time, but they are very different. You might have Zyra a couple of years ago, $1 billion startup, and that was a real exception by itself. But you do have the 250 to 600, I guess. Ultima was a $600 million startup, so you do have aberrations like that. But I think the money has to go up, and I'll just say a couple of things now, and if there's time, say more on that. I think money has to go up, and money going up doesn't mean necessarily dollars going up. It may be productivity. And that is because I think we have touched on many times today, but not spent enough time on China. And DeepSeek was, a dramatic example of how a few dollars, leave aside all the issues of how they might have leveraged knowledge or databases from elsewhere, et cetera, right? But it's a huge thing. And I think this is the point in time. And when I point in time, we always like to think this is the moment. It's not this microsecond. It is these few years that the advent of AI being added is a big change. It's as big a change as the first gene splicing, which, I think that was 1980, the Nobel Prize. So 95 or so, Stelios might remember, Amgen crossed $1 billion, first biotech company that crossed $1 billion in revenue, right? That was the time period. That was a big change, that and monoclonal antibodies, right? You've had big changes in RNA. We've seen some of that. I think this is the third big change that will lead to a lot of commercialization eventually, right? You would see maybe $1 trillion of revenue come out from what happens here. I'll stop there.
And Paul?
Sastry, just to say at the outset, so I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Amgen, and I have regulatory affairs, patient safety, medical affairs, global public health, and digital medicine. And my boss is Dave Reese. Some of you know Dave, right? Dave is our Chief Technology Officer, though, right? So I now sit in a technology organization, but have all of those different patient-facing functions. So, I think as a company, we really see the power of AI and what that can bring to patients. So biggest development, opportunity, and challenge, right, you asked for. So I think the biggest development for us has been faster filing. We can now generate a clinical study report, which, many of you in this room have participated in authoring. It can take, 4 weeks. We can do that now in 73 minutes. We can generate a CSR of really good quality. And our aim is to try and get that filing timeline down from maybe 24 weeks, whatever your kind of standard would be, 20, 24 weeks, down to maybe 8 weeks. Think of the number of lives you can impact by a 15, 18-week acceleration. So I think structured content automation and rapid filing timelines is biggest development. In terms of opportunity, I really think it is around simplifying the patient journey. Colin Hill is in this audience, and I've talked with him over the years, and I think more and more that there's a huge opportunity for us as Big Pharma to be able to offer to patients things like put in some rudimentary information into a digital twin, create a digital twin on our website, and let that tell you about your patient journey and balance benefit and risk. And then you can have an informed discussion with your physician about what treatment you want to do. So I think that's a big opportunity. The challenge for me is only 12% of this country has health literacy that is sufficient to let them navigate the healthcare system today, right? So 1 in 8 people only is able to navigate the healthcare system. And there's a nice piece of data. The Mayo Clinic, which is arguably one of the preeminent diagnostic centers in the world, of people who go there for a second opinion, 92% of them leave with a different or altered diagnosis. Can you believe that? So only 1 in 8 people can navigate the healthcare system. And as a physician community, I would say the reality is we don't do a good job of diagnosing people. That's, I think, a big opportunity where AI today could come in and blow the doors off that for patient journey and outcome improvement.
Great. So you heard a little bit about the whole range of impact that AI has been delivering across all of these companies. So let's pivot a little bit to what will it take to be able to get the entire value out. And we'll start with Nicole and Belen, right? There's going to be a ton of money that flows into this domain that's going to accelerate the maturity of AI. I'd argue that the AI is probably performing the worst it will in the next decade right now. It's only going to keep getting better every passing day. So what are the roadblocks to be able to accelerate the value to the point that Andy was making in the previous panel, that the cost of trials just keeps going up and we're not able to bend the curve? I know both of you are in for like less than 100 days, so tell us what are you going to change?
No, yeah. No, I can take a stab. And I think this is a general industry trend, right? So the first one is the data. I know this is not you have been hearing about the same thing probably for many years, but the reality, the data in pharmaceuticals is still being very siloed. And this brings from our history of different legacy systems, acquisitions. So that still yet needs to be solved. There is a lot of funding on this space, but I would say there is a big area that in reality it's a must before we can harness full value of the technologies. I think the second one is in the generation of data. We have quite a bit of data generated, depending on the therapeutic areas that we live. But on the other hand, there is data there still is not sufficient, right? So I don't know, in discovery, usually the availability of protein data and ligand structure data still is a gap in industry to advance the utility of AI models in discovery. So how can we partner smartly to generate this data at scale? So that's another obstacle about generating pieces of data that we don't have through partnership, etc. And the third one is the one that we have all touched in different themes, which is how we get this data to those that they are doing the job in the day-to-day, right? Is the adoption of these tools. The models are getting smarter and smarter, but still the chasm between those doing the job is increasing. There is individual scientists doing the work the same way that they used to do it in the past. So those are the three core themes that I see in general.
Yeah, I may add one more to that, which is around commoditization, which I think will be critical for us as an industry. And what do I mean by that? You know, I'm lucky enough to work across the research and development space, but those are two pretty different areas, and you're able to experiment a bit more. You can build things and throw them away in the research space. But I think to play and have a true AI end-to-end ecosystem across R&D, that will require off-the-shelf capabilities that don't exist now. And so all of us are having to make choices about what do we build, what do we buy, and what do we wait for. And getting that balance right will be important. The reality is that there's very little off the shelf right now that at least big pharma can use and apply right now. And with limited funding, that means that we're going to need to be choiceful.
Yeah. So, yes, please.
Can I add something to answer Andy? So Andy blamed the FDA and the regulatory bodies. And I think there is plenty to blame on them. But there is even more to blame on big pharma and the culture. I may be naive. I mean, I'm a computer scientist, but I worked with different types of pharma and biotech on clinical trials. And here is the thing that I think is very important. 80 to 90% of the drug don't make it. It's not about the FDA or the EMA. So 80 to 90% of the cost of the clinical trials is really based on your own decision, you pharma biotech. So if you actually decide to really innovate intrinsically, you can take these clinical trials, be able to innovate and automate them effectively. And the vast majority of them, those 90% of the drugs that are not going to make it anyway, be able to discover that early on. Maybe you're not going to be successful in all of them. I mean, it's even if you remove 20% of them, that's a huge reduction in cost for pharma. I mean, the status quo, I mean, again, I worked with pharma and biotech. I understand clinical trials are extremely complicated and hard and all of that stuff. But the amount of complexity that comes from just the status quo is really amazing for somebody coming from outside the industry. So I think doing generating protocols and documents and all of that stuff, great use of AI, that's the low-hanging fruit, and that's amazing, and you definitely should do it. But just give you an example, take any clinical, say they are running a clinical trial in ALS. You are going to have to recruit patients in size internationally. You're going to run a long clinical trial that is going to span several years. During that time, patients are going to die. Andy said mundane work, a lot of mundane work that involves humongous number of people across many countries. That is, I think, the main problem. And errors happens everywhere. Like, and again, like in an ALS, like the metric is the ALS FRS. That's the end point. When somebody take that and try to collect that from an ALS patient or their caregiver in Peru versus in like New York, in the US versus somebody in Finland, the Netherlands, it's just the amount of additional uncertainty and noise that is inserted to this whole process. So there are ways to automate many of that, but that's not the way pharma works today. It just requires, and most of the people are going to be very uncomfortable with doing this. Yeah. So it requires a bit of just like really going for like very bold and making mistake at the beginning. The first few trials are going to have frictions, no doubt about it. But if you really want to change something, you have to like really remove the humongous amount of humans in the loop everywhere in a clinical trial, from humans that are educated to humans just the workers who goes to someone's home to collect something.
Yep. So Nicole, you started to touch on it, which is you can't do everything organically in-house. So I'll open it up, maybe Paul and Parag, you can start. How do you start to partner with the broader ecosystem? Because the big nuggets that all of your companies are sitting on is your 100 years of history. And that becomes the training data that could serve as models that could very easily commoditize the secret sauce of your company. So how do you start to draw the boundaries between what do you keep in-house and protect the crown jewels versus where do you want to partner, and how do you start to architect the ecosystem around you?
So I can begin a little bit. I mean, look, I think, a partnership is exactly that. You need to pick a few trusted partners, right, who you're going to work closely with. You have some shared kind of cultural values, and you set out on a journey that you want to go after together. We partner with a lot of organizations, and we partner with NVIDIA. We've built this big computer stack that we have now in Iceland, just because of the computing power for all the data we have there with Decode. We're working very closely with OpenAI. I mean, I think to take a slightly different... So I don't think there's an issue. I don't think there's an issue, honestly. You have to pick the people who you can trust. You have to trust people. For me, it's as well then thinking about the difference between digital and AI. And I think the two get confused and conflated all the time. And I agree exactly with what you were just saying about how we do our clinical trials. We overburden them. They can be done for a fraction of the cost we do them at. And honestly, AI isn't going to solve that, but digitalization might.
Parag?
Just to take a different angle on that, on a couple of things related to that. So I agree that, that the, or let me step back 1 second. I think the part that will accelerate on its own is the AI part. I think those programs will constantly get better and better and better, and we'll be amazed at what's happening in that area, right? So I think the challenge is whether it is for a good clinical trial or other data in the ideal world that we think about it, right? Where every piece of information about me, either I'm entering and I'm doing it digitally, so it's lots of errors are avoided, or is collected from somewhere else to do research, right? So either clinical trials or research. The quality of the data is critical, and frequently it was not purpose-built for the analysis that it is now subject to, right? So you get a lot of data and you want to look at diabetics, but they didn't collect A1Cs. They just had a glucose tolerance test and determined that they were, right? And so it's that kind of thing. And I think we need to have a way to improve that, and that's an opportunity also. All these holes are opportunities in terms of the data, and those costs have to come down. Because if you just a simple raw number, by a person less educated by everybody else on this panel. But in round numbers, if you do sequencing, proteomics, look at the metabolome, we're talking $1,500 per person, not counting the sample cost, right? You want to have high confidence in your results, should you use 500,000 patients? Should you use 1 million patients? Right? That's $1.5 billion, right? So something has to come down. One part that will come down and has been coming down, but still not enough, right? Ultima just announced $100, free or sample for that to and kind of thing. Proteome is much more expensive, right? And you need all those orthogonal pieces of data for the foundational models to work.
Yep.
So that has to come down, and the quality of the data has to improve. One thought I have for people to think about is endogamous populations give you significantly more data, consanguineous populations even more, and the probability of finding recessive genes, and therefore PCSK9 being one of the great examples of that, is so much higher because you reduce your cost, both number of samples to 1%. It's not a 1 log difference. It is a 2 to 3 log difference, right? And the other thing it does, of course, is time. Because if you're processing 10,000 samples from 1 million samples, time savings are obvious.
Yeah. The one area we didn't touch on in the last 20 minutes is the drug discovery side. Last year, the panel talked a little bit about how we're going from target to lead to phase 1 in a matter of in a much faster cycle time than what we've historically done. So a year on, what are the latest war stories from the front lines on the drug discovery side?
You want me to chime in? So from our side, we have been investing quite a bit on the discovery space. This is an area that obviously the data, it's what we call the high dimensional data. Therefore, there is a lot of potential for these models. Especially on the chemistry side, medicinal chemistry and the computational chemist, that's where we have built probably one of the first models that they are able to leverage and analyze almost more than 200 million compounds at this point, leveraging high content cellular imaging and linking it with some of the biological impacts that we see. So from that space, there has been that development. I think where we are seeing some of the advancements coming up outside, it's more on how we can leverage these more complex structures, leveraging higher compute capability. I think the limited factor that we have as well is that how we grow the compute based on the amount of analysis that can happen now in parallel. And that's an area that we are looking forward very closely with our technical partners and other partners like the Isomorphics and others, that they have the ability to leverage that compute power for them to be able to bring those insights.
I think the area of discovery is so interesting because, point of fact, AI, machine learning, and that part of research has been around for a long time. Predictive analytics isn't new. Compute has made that much more possible at scale. And so I think now when we're seeing more traditional or predictive AI combined with generative AI, now combined with agentic AI, we're allowing ourselves to kind of fundamentally rethink the relationships between humans, machines, and AI when we imagine the lab of the future. So it's not just predict first, in silico first. Yep, that's table stakes. Every biopharma is going to need to fundamentally change our approach to computation versus wet lab. But then imagine adding in the machines, the lab machines, and agentic AI. You can imagine a future where discovery looks almost completely different than it does now. Our labs will look completely different than they do now. They'll probably be basically empty. You imagine huge labs with very few people and remote lab workers, working through a machine to kind of control the experiments alongside an agent or a suite of agents. The hard part for us and for all of us is what's the roadmap to get there, and what's the change rate we can absorb to get there.
And Paul?
Just to kind of build on that a bit, I mean, I think we are at this hinge moment. The power of biology, like when I think back to when I did my PhD, discovery was kind of governed by the experiments you could do, right, and serendipity. So if you could do Western blotting, that would take you down some path and you would find something. But think about the myriad of, biological technology that you have today. Now with AI, and again, when I did my PhD, we used to use Index Medicus. I mean, anybody remember Index Medicus, right? There's a lot of old people in this audience. Like, you guys, don't be so shy. You guys can remember it. I mean, you could not, you could not function now. So AI, I think, is part of that hinge, which is going to really augment what we're able to discover. And now we have the biological tools, because theory will get you only so far. You've then got to go and test it. I think this moment where we are, somebody said it earlier, like this is going to be the century of medicine, and we're positioned for it now. And AI is going to be that augmenter.
Great. Let's, sorry, you had something, Dina?
I think in pharma, it's much easier to think about AI in discovery, because that has evolved much more. But just let me give you a few examples that are more on the clinical side. So, for example, like with the new Alzheimer drugs, the amyloid modulators. So in that case, you have to monitor, for example, for ARIA. I mean, we know ARIA actually, the brain swelling on one hand, it's a side effect that we are very afraid of, but on the other hand, it's probably a sign that something is working. So today, what do we have? We use the thing that we are comfortable with, what we know that we can use, which is MRI. You bring patients to an MRI center that limits drastically the number of patients, and not just limit the number of patients, limit the patients who are willing to go for that, because they may not have access to that MRI center. And I can allow you from thin air to get EEG of the person in their home every single night. Okay? Yeah. So we know how to do that, and I can show you these new results. So from wireless signal without touching somebody, when they sleep, I can get their EEG. Now we know that there are EEG markers of ARIA. Now again, I'm making a bit of leap here in hypothesis like that. We can take these same markers that we see in the EEG, and we can measure them regularly every night in patients' home. Now actually, not only that you can react and discover it much earlier and be safer, but you can reach even to more patients. You can change the way you work. You can monitor exactly to get to a level that you are comfortable with and not push the boundary where your drug becomes unsafe. So there are many new ways that if you allow yourself to think about AI in a clinical way, integrating it with your development. I can give you another example, and I'm going to say about the immune system. The immune system is a dynamic system, of course. But just to borrow, I'm not sure whether I'm using the exact term that Stelios used, but I'm just going to we kind of treat today diseases that are episodic, like for example, autoimmune diseases with flares, for example. That's an episode. The person is fine between them. So we treat these episodic diseases with chronic drugs. You knock off the immune system of the person. But if you are able to completely understand and detect the flare much earlier, then you can probably intervene with drugs that are you wouldn't use them on a regular basis, on a chronic basis, because probably they are too strong for that. But you can now use them by the right amount at the right time before allowing a flare to take hold of the person. It changes completely the mentality and the way you develop your drug. Yep. But we work in the traditional way.
Great. So I want to get to some audience questions, but before we turn it over to the audience, maybe we'll go from Paul all the way down. What do you see as one big change we're going to talk about, or achievement we'll talk about when we get together next year and in 3 years in terms of the advances of AI? I've had more than a minute to think about it, so if you want me to go first, I can, Paul.
I think for me it would be to get beyond the hype. You know, everybody in this room, like if you're not doing AI, ML, your board is going to be after you like your toast, right? So we're all on it, but we've got to get beyond that as a buzzword and bring it to life in a small but important, tangible way to clearly, definitively show it helps patient outcome. I'd love to see that one of us has done something there for next year.
Yeah.
Hopefully me.
Keep going, Parag.
I think I'll just double down on what I said, which is I think cleaning data or having clean data in the first place and bringing down the cost of the analysis of that from an opportunity point of view are the two big opportunities.
Yeah.
I really like that, Parag, and I hope that, I don't think we'll see this next year. I think next year we'll see focus. I think all of us will be much more focused on our applications of AI and ML to build that ecosystem and integrated approach to AI that we're looking towards. I hope in 3 years, truly our biggest problem is the underlying quality or lack of connectivity or integration of our data across within our companies. I hope that in 3 years, that's a solved problem. That's what I hope, and that's made possible due to technical advances that have not been possible to date. It's been a Sisyphean task, and I would be very excited if in 3 years we weren't still talking about the data problem.
Yeah. Dina?
What I hope to see in 3 years? I hope that the industry will adopt more brave solutions, like we'll take a step, like you are a rich industry, you are very scientific. If an industry can be brave, it should be such an industry. You are really, like everything that you do is embedded in science. But at the same time, you are extremely conservative. I understand there are scenarios where you have to be extremely conservative, but unfortunately, you are conservative across the whole spectrum when you actually can be really revolutionary.
Right, Belen?
Yeah, for me, again, I wish that in 3 years we think that we say that the data has been solved, that one for sure. But I think just to add something different, it would be, I hope that in 3 years, especially with the conversations that we have been discussing in the room with regulators, we can start leveraging real world data indeed to advance development. I do think that is feasible. There is especially a limited number of big players here that in reality we can have an impact, not only from a big pharma, I would say, and pharma perspective, but also from the EHR providers. And that conversation has been ongoing for a while, and I hope that this can be unlocked with the new administration.
Yeah. I think in 3 years, certain domains of what we do will be taken over by AI. And protein folding for now, I think, is one of the lead candidates that goes there. Radiology is something I think will end up being taken over by AI. I also think clinical operations and large parts of clinical operations will get taken over by AI. All right, so in the remaining couple of minutes, why don't I ask the audience for some questions? Sai, you had a pre-wired question here.
No, thank you. It's a really enlightening discussion. The previous panel, one statement stuck with me: human stupidity is still the same. So I'm very curious to understand from your perspective, like what do you think is holding us back, and what can the ecosystem do to further the impact of AI in our industry?
Paul, do you
I
think?
can start. Look, I'd go back to what you said. We've got to be bold, pick some big bets, and go after them. In a methodical and thoughtful way. I think that's what's holding us back. We've got a lot of data. We have predictive tools at Amgen. We can speed up the time to do trials. We can improve our predictive ability. I think there is also an opportunity now. It was said earlier that we are coming together a little more as an industry, and I think that's an opportunity too.
Yeah, Gautam, you had one? And then Tony, you had a unwired question, is it?
Hi, my name is Saurabh. I'm an entrepreneur who works at the intersection of data analytics and AI to solve R&D productivity issues. So, Belen, this question is for you, but Nicole or Paul, you can take a stab at this as well. A couple of weeks ago, the Wall Street Journal published an article which titled Johnson & Johnson Pivots its AI Strategy. It was about Jim Swanson, the CIO, talking about the AI hype and the Pareto principle that 20% of the use cases give 80% of the value. So my question is, what advice would you give to companies still in the early experimental phase of AI adoption in their R&D functions to accelerate the path to sustainable adoption and ROI? What I mean by that is, at the end of the day, it's the frontline workers that need to have data literacy and AI literacy to really achieve that value. How are you doing that within J&J, and what advice do you have for other companies that might be behind you on that curve?
No, thank you. And we're almost done.
No.
Yeah. We can talk after. I feel bad to take.
Yeah, no, take the question and then we can
Yeah, so
wrap
I think the advice in general in J&J, we started experimenting across the board, right? And that was very deliberate choice to experiment, quick building, partnering, almost like doing for the past 3 years. Now the people that in reality Jim was highlighting is that now what we are the phase of scaling up those exercises. So there has been a whole process around prioritization, and that's something that is almost like a must-have across companies. I would say that what is something very different is the adoption of these tools, and I think, Nicole, you were bringing this up, that in the moment that the tool is really helping the worker on the spot with the systems that they use, the tools will be adopted, right? So there is quite a bit of effort to make sure that there is these training programs and awareness programs about the plethora of tools that we have. So that's still kind of that chasm that I was highlighting, that more and more technologies come, all of the big tech supporting pharma is bringing this technology full stack. But then there is one person having to make sense of all of these systems and still working in the same way that they worked decades ago. So that's the effort and the investment that we need to do that Jim was highlighting, that we are doubling down.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we're on time. And Karun, we're on to the next part of the agenda.